So I would like to welcome you to Growing Together. It's a workshop for 0 to 4, as we all know, and I've repeated many times. But for those of you who are just coming in today, so these workshops are brought to you by First Nations Education Council in collaboration with the First Nations Health Commission. So, like I said before, my name is Cheryl Tandesi Wabshib or Tanasco Whiteduck. And one last reminder I wanted to make for those daycares who are sending me receipts. Like, I haven't seen a receipt for a while, so please forward them as soon as you get them to me, Cheryl Tanasco Whiteduck at csssbnql.com. And you've introduced yourselves already.
Yeah. Well, we'll do it again for the recording. Yes. Thank you, Cheryl.
Ava's on the right, and for me, Lena's on the left. So I'll let you ladies go.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. And we look forward to your thoughts as we go through this material. So my name is Eva DeGostiny. I'm a child psychologist, and I've been working for a long time in the field, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to share just some of the knowledge that I have to enhance what you already know about children. And I'm so fortunate to have with me Lena. And Lena, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I share Eva's enthusiasm for being together with you in these sessions. It's a great honor to be asked. I am an early childhood educator. I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother, and I am absolutely delighted to say that I am currently in the presence of my grandchild and daughter who live on the west coast of the US, and I live on the east coast of the US. So you will be seeing me during all of these 8 presentations, and we welcome you so wholeheartedly to our conversations.
Thank you, Lena. So we have a presentation, and maybe we can just start with we'll share our slides. Yeah.
Just give me a minute.
Yep.
Should be it.
Yeah, session 5 of 8.
Yes, and I'm just going to take 1 second here, Eva, and collapse us a little bit. Okay. So this is session 5, and it's very interesting to me that it is the central session in many ways to everything else we've been talking about. Today's topic is emotions in young children, and it cannot be stressed enough how this is really the cornerstone or the organizing principle around which everything else we're talking about runs. And Eva, just jump right in if you have anything else to share.
I will, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So in session 5, we have a break, as usual, about midway. We're going to first be talking about how emotions work and how that leads us to respecting emotional experience for not just children, really, but in this presentation, our focus is on children. And then in the second part, we're going to be talking about some of the things that we see as that we might not normally look at as an emotional response, and particularly alarm and tears. There'll be a time for questions and reflection at the end. Cheryl will be joining us throughout. I think I've said pretty much all of this, except to add that we have in previous sessions talked about natural immaturity and what that means in terms of what we see in young children. Based on neuroscience. And we will be going back to refresh our memories of what we learned in those sessions. And then in part 2, we're going to be looking at reducing alarm and creating, I was so struck in Cheryl's beginning words to us. She talked about keeping us safe. And that is actually what we're talking about in this presentation. How do we make it safe for emotions to emerge in our classrooms? I worked for 8 years at Bowdoin College Children's Center in Maine. And many of the photos that you're going to be seeing, but not by any means all, are from my classroom. To begin, I like to connect us to the seasons and to the universe and to nature's world and the natural world. And we are now in the season of spring. We are passing through 3 or 4 seasons this time. We'll have a little bit of taste of summer at the end, really late spring. But now we're in spring, and such an incredibly joyful season. I want to share with you words of one of the mentors in my life, Parker Palmer, about spring. Before spring becomes beautiful, it is plug ugly, nothing but mud and muck. I have walked in the early spring through fields that will suck your boots off, a world so wet and woeful it makes you yearn for the return of ice. But in that muddy mess, the conditions for rebirth are being created. Emotions are messy. Like this time that we're in spring, there's a lot to deal with when we begin to talk and notice the emotional world of a young child. And in this presentation, I want you to keep in mind that we're not going to be so much focused on shifting behavior, but rather giving what is needed for the behavior to shift through the child's own internalization of conditions that help a child to thrive. And we're speaking here of emotional safety. We are looking outside of the moment towards the fruit of what will eventually be born in our children. We trust in nature and in this process that a power greater than ourselves, that of nature, is at work in this messy season, which leads to blossom and then to fruit. We're going to begin by talking about how emotions work.
Yeah.
And to start, we want to just point out that there are many emotions. Eva, do you have something to say on this one?
Yeah. Well, just that we will probably be, and we tend to want to focus on some of the ones that are a bit more challenging. But of course, we all know there is joy and contentment and desire and all the lovely emotions, along with frustration and sadness. So there's many, as we see on this little boy's face. There's lots of things that can be going on inside of a child in a child's world.
And this last sentence, I think, is really important, Eva. I think you'd agree. In fact, you probably wrote this sentence. Emotions may be difficult to manage in daily life with young children.
Well, anyone who works in a center will know that this is your challenge. This is what you are. So we're going to look a little bit at how emotions work. They tend to be discounted. We kind of want to manage them and sort of push them into a little corner, but we really need to understand what's going on inside of us as living human beings. As many of you who have heard me speak before know that I'm very interested in sort of how our brain works, how that connects to our body, and how that then connects back into what's going on inside of us in a much more holistic sense. So emotions, they start out by something that has happened on the outside for the most part. So something goes on, and we have a part of our brain that we call the emotional brain, or the limbic system, actually basically says, oh, something's going on out here. I got to do something about it. And if we want to do something about it, we actually need the help of naturally occurring chemicals inside of our body. And many of us know that. We're possibly lying in our bed and quite happy to stay there and resting. And then all of a sudden we remember that we have to get somewhere. And in that moment, the fact that we see on our clock that it is now time to get up, that's the outside event that basically then tells our system, you've got to do something. And so a little bit of adrenaline gets into our system, a little bit of cortisol, and that helps us to actually get up and out and moving and doing what we have to do. And this is how it generally works. And we're going to look at some of the things, some of the situations particularly that cause emotions to happen for children, and the different ways in which our brain and our body respond to trying to make sure that we deal with whatever it is happening. And when we get adrenaline in, it changes our heart rate, changes how we breathe, changes our body temperature, changes how we move, our skin tone, our eyes. And of course, all of these things are things that we as human beings that interact with each other will notice. If you think about any of the children in your care, you'll know that some of them, every one of them will tell you in a different way that there's something going on inside of them. Some of them, it's their skin color. Their cheeks will get all of a sudden really red, or their eyes will get big, or they will really start moving around. And these are all signs that something is going on inside of them. And it's a natural response for dealing with whatever's happening. So when these are around emotions, and emotions actually really are about everything that we do, once it starts getting activated, once those kind of chemicals start flowing, it kind of needs to come out. And that needs to come out both from a perspective of our body, but also from the perspective of what is going on inside of us in terms of our whole experience as a human being. And so it's very important for us to understand that emotions do need to be expressed. Now, how they're expressed, especially for those of us that are mature, we have the ability to figure out when and how to do that in an appropriate way that doesn't bother other people. But with our little ones, and this is part of what we're going to do today with our little ones, we're going to really focus on the fact that for them, it's a behavior. Something's moving inside of them and it comes out of them in a way that basically shows us that something's going on. I don't know, Elena, if you want to add anything.
Oh, I think that captured it very well. Thank you, Eva.
Yeah. And we're not in control of that process. It's an automatic thing because it really has to do with very, very basic things like survival. And so we have to depend upon this very natural primary sense of us. And so the triggers, we don't always know what it is that's kind of setting off these emotions. Sometimes as we get older, again, we can reflect upon it. But again, for a very young child, it's much more of an automatic thing. And of course, as you all know, they can go from smiling to crying very quickly, because the emotional world is a fluid world.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So how do we keep these emotions moving through? Because one of the things that we have to remember is that when that all these all what's going on inside of us, if it's actually stopped, it can cause us some problems. And so what we want to be doing and what we're going to be talking about today is really making sure that we give a space for these emotions, especially in our young children, to move through as best it can in a way that's appropriate for their age and their stage so that they don't get stuck. All of us know that it doesn't feel good when something is stuck inside of us. It doesn't. Our bodies don't respond very well. Our minds do not work very well. So we need to really help this movement to happen. Again, this is just a little guy who's just moving through something, but you can just see that there's a little bit of a struggle and something interesting, and then the release that comes at the end. And that's really what we're talking about with emotions. It's just a way that we have to respect the process that is there, and it's a very important, natural human process.
And Eva, I would just add that it's also quite common that emotions are stuck for all of us, and recognizing that they don't just go away, they get stuck somewhere in the body.
Yeah.
And a lot of life, there's a wonderful book called The Body Keeps the Score. And so on, a lot of life is spent in recovering what maybe got stuck. So and it's going to happen, right? Yeah. It's going to happen because we all have to adjust to our cultures and our human world. But during these beginning years, the more we can facilitate, see our role as actual facilitators of emotional expression, the less dammed up, if you will, the emotions of the young children will be that are in our care. Yeah. So
yeah, here's the iceberg.
Central image for you to take away today.
Yes, because we see on the top, we see something, but boy, is there ever a lot underneath. So much underneath. And this is really one of the things we need to understand, is that our emotions are underneath. They're in our bodies. They are in the chemical reaction. And then they have to rise up. And then we have to try and be able to give them a name, be able to give them permission to exist. And so we're always going to be thinking about this image here in the sense that we respect what's underneath, and we want to bring it out. And as children get older and older, we will help them to bring it out in other ways. But first, it has to start coming out. And of course, the way in which we help these emotions to come out is this safe and accepting atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Permission to exist, and to normalize, to begin to normalize the existence of emotions. I think that all of us have experienced disconnection many times in our life from our emotions. And this is just a beginning session on maybe how to practice acceptance.
Yeah.
How
yeah, go ahead.
Moving on, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
You have more to say about this one?
Well, yes. And so one of the biggest experiences as a human being that we all have is the need for attachment. This little baby, as we well know, all of the children in your care, they cannot survive unless we, the adults, are there to take care of them, their parents, their grandparents, their aunts and uncles, whoever is their primary caregiver in their home, and you as the caregivers in the center when they come to you. And over and over again, we want to bring back and remind ourselves how important being attached, being together, being with someone is to us as human beings. It is the most primary need that we have, even more primary than needing food, because when I'm in with someone who is going to be taking care of me, they will give me the food if they can, and so we're so moved by it. And we have this very strong instinct, which allows us to notice when we are in attachment, but also alerts us to when there's a problems with our attachment, and so this is why we're constantly coming back to this, because our little ones, our very, very little ones, our 0 to 4-year-olds, they're constantly inside of them is this big question: who is taking care of me? And we've talked in other sessions, and for those of you that have not been at the other sessions, they are recorded and you can go and listen to them, and where we've unpacked this a bit more. But we call this kind of a primal separation alarm. There's kind of a shock to the system. The system is seeking to try and get back into attachment and relationship.
And this never changes for human beings. It just gets more sophisticated, as we know from the roots of attachment that we looked at an earlier presentation. Sorry, grasping for words there. And this idea of who is taking care of me is never really far from our emotional core.
No.
Yeah.
No.
But for a young child who has a very limited experience of the world, it becomes focused in various ways, which we're now going to talk about.
Yeah. So what happens is when there's a sense that there's a little bit of a break in our relationship, it's very interesting. And this happens for every one of us. It happened, this recording is being done in our second year of the pandemic, COVID pandemic, and certainly at the beginning of it. And most of you can remember probably right back to the early days when we were told that we had to stay home and we couldn't visit the people or be with the people that we wanted to be with. And most of us probably weren't even thinking about, how important attachment was to us until we couldn't be with the people we wanted to be with. And so the material that we're sharing with you right now is the material from Dr. Gordon Neufeld. He's a developmental psychologist from Vancouver, British Columbia, who has really looked at trying to look at human nature in a very broad way. And he looked at all of the research on the various emotions that are elicited or pulled forth when we are facing separation. And he said, okay, there's three big ones that are going to happen. And we'll talk about these, but they are pursuit, which is seeking to restore the relationship, alarm, being really careful, and frustration, trying to change.
Right.
Yeah.
And we'll go on to look at each of those individually.
Yeah. And I think most of you, again, if you think about the children in your care, maybe about one particular child who is quite demonstrative emotionally, you've probably seen all of these things. When the parent or the caregiver goes to leave the center, it's very natural, especially if the child doesn't know you very well yet, for them to basically do whatever they can to convince that person, that key person in their life, not to leave. And so they're going to try different things. So this is an instinct. This is, people say, oh, well, the child has learned how to do that. No, we don't learn to do that. This happens spontaneously. And so they're going to, oh, mommy, please, could you stay another minute? Right? So they're going to be very sweet, or they're going to say, I promise to be good, mommy, if you stay. I mean, anything that happens, we do that ourselves in our relationships. If somebody is not pleased with us, we'll say, well, what can I do to make things better? How can I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I mean, we all do this. This is the natural response to repairing a relationship, to continuing a relationship. But then, of course, sometimes mommy and daddy or, grandma has to leave. And then all of a sudden, the intensity, the desire to restore this proximity gets a little stronger. And Lena, you can describe what some of the children do in those circumstances, right?
Yes, I think the picture says it all. And this is kind of an archetypal response. When it's time for a separation to happen, there's a lot of resistance to it, which becomes clingy, crying, begging. We could make the list even longer, and I'm sure you could too. You could include aggression in that, so on and so forth. Yeah. But it serves in a very odd and paradoxical way to make the parent actually leave, right? There's something about that behavior, if we're looking at it just as, ew, that actually causes more separation.
Yeah.
It's actually getting to the desired separation, right? The parent has to leave. Yeah.
But we have to understand, and I think this to me is what made all the difference when I understood this, was that, first of all, as human beings, separation is so hard on us. So of course a child's going to do whatever they can to persuade you to stay. Please. I mean, it's perfectly normal, not particularly, useful or necessarily, or not particularly pleasant, especially if they've got a really high, whiny voice and it's really grating on our nerves. But all of a sudden when we see it as, oh, this child basically is, again, asking, but then if you aren't going to be here taking care of me, who will? And again, we've had other sessions where we've talked about how we create the conditions so that the child feels safe with us, and we take over. But these responses, it's nothing wrong with that. It's not bad parenting. In fact, I worry more about the children who don't at least feel a little bit of regret when their parent leaves, because it's perfectly natural to want to have, and to want to have both. To want to have mommy and, the beloved caregiver at the daycare as well. But when that transition happens, this is one of the emotions that comes along with trying to keep everybody in the same place.
Yes, exactly. And so we try, of course, and we'll be talking about this more, to help the child through that particular facing of separation when their parent leaves, or whoever their primary person is outside of the child care center.
So the next one, the other emotion that comes is well, we call it alarm. It's a little bit different than the primal separation alarm. It's kind of another sort of an alarm, which basically says, okay, I got to be careful now. I got to be careful because it's interesting because some children are more pursuit children. They're more the begging, the please stay, mommy. And the other ones are kind of like, okay, I can't say anything, but I'm just going to kind of hide or block my ears or be shy. So I don't cause more alarm. I don't cause more separation by my behavior. And so these are, again, it's kind of a protective mechanism that some children have. And again, perfectly natural, perfectly normal. Each child has their own way of responding to the separation, the feeling of separation. One isn't better than the other one. They're different. Some of these children are usually kind of a little bit less of a worry to us, unless, of course, some of them do like really go into the fetal position and hide, and then we know, okay, there's big alarm in them. But it's just perfectly normal to want to kind of just protect yourself from things that are scary, and separation is scary.
Yes, it is. And we protect ourselves and we act sweet on a daily basis as well. But this is when we're actually very little, and the children are facing a separation that is difficult for them.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Now, the third emotion we call frustration. Sometimes we often, for the most part, see that as kind of a negative emotion because it will lead to things like attacking in some way. No, mommy, don't go. And the child will hit the mommy. But actually, we need to backtrack a little bit, because frustration is the emotion that leads us to try and change a situation that isn't working. And we will in our next session actually be talking a lot more about it. So it really is a way of trying to convince somebody to change their mind. And some children will, oh, you can't go right now because, I have to show you this, or I have to show you that. The frustration moves the child to try and do something so that the relationship can stay there. But of course, we know that when it really can't, then that big emotion turns into something else. And it turns into the behaviors that we're usually not too thrilled to see. And again, next session, we're going to talk about kind of how we can work with that. But the complaining, the whining, the pushing, the grabbing, the hitting, the biting, and the tantrums, which are all the way of the child's emotional system basically saying, you got to change what's going on here. I can't handle this separation. Please change it. Right. And so again, when we see it in that way, when we see it as a response to feeling like, who's going to take care of me, I think it's a little easier to understand those behaviors. Not fun to hear them when there's a big rip roar and tantrum going on, but we see it as, oh, this child is really trying to find somebody to take care of them, and we need to interpret it. We're kind of like interpreters. We see a behavior and we say in the back of our mind, what's that behavior trying to tell us? And again, the child can't always change our mind. And again, we're going to talk about, well, if they can't change our mind, what needs to happen? But this is a very healthy response. I'm much more worried about children who have no reaction at all. especially in the early days of coming to your childcare center, when they seem to just be willing to have anybody take care of them. But we'll talk about that a bit later.
And so the takeaway in all of this, too, aside from starting to see these responses as a response to facing separation, we're going to expand what separation means a little bit. We've been focused on a parent dropping off a child. We're going to flesh that out a little bit, and we're also going to talk about how we can normalize and welcome these expressions because we understand them now in a different way, and we don't want to disconnect the child from their feeling. That's what our central theme is today, is how to work with these situations. And we'll be spending much more time with this as we finish up our series. And if you go back to the play one, which was the last session, it's also a very important part of play. So experiences of separation, here's where we're going to kind of broaden out. Of course, physical separation from a caregiver, parent, or other person who has the primary responsibility for taking care of that child, for answering the question, who is taking care of me? We have separation when a child's thoughts, play, and activities are interrupted. Any place where they're deeply engaged and their focus is in the present, that's where they are. And when we ask a child to move to a different activity, to a transition, it's time to go inside. We can imagine that being said to this little boy. We need to change your diaper. Your mother is here, your mother is leaving, your father is here, your father's leaving. Any of these situations that interrupt a child whose focus is on something else, whose actual engagement is with something else, is experienced as a separation. So we've broadened out suddenly now how we're looking at why we get resistance to transitions, to care needs, to departures and arrivals of a parent. They're all separations because, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead here, Eva.
That's okay.
To just bring in a little more information about what an experience of separation is for a little child. The child's focus is in the present. And so how can we make this how can we get through the day gently so that they're not experiencing those three reactions that we just talked about of pursuit and frustration and alarm, to being asked to move from one activity to another while they're in our care. So one way is to have form and predictability. So my daughter is struggling with this with her baby, who's 8 months old right now, because he experiences separation alarm when her attention is off of him and on the dishes and so on. So we talked a little bit this morning about how providing more form and predictability in the day. He has a predictable day, but it is centered around his alarm system, not getting the dishes done. So she's going to just make sure that she has a rhythm that includes taking care of the house, which sometimes just gets left to nap time. We have all experienced this, right? Who have children. In making one thing, the getting the dishes done after a meal, as part of something that he becomes familiar with. So we see when a child has a lot of form and predictability, they then know how their day is going to unfold. And they do not feel as much alarm when your attention is taken off of them. The other one we have, Eva, sorry, do you have anything to add to that? Just that one, form and predictability? Okay, I'll go on. So the next one is to collect before you direct. We're going to be talking about this much more in subsequent presentations, which is that you really want to come up to a child and approach them gently and say, hello, you're really involved. You're really building something here. You're really noticing something here. You're commenting on what they're doing, not in terms of praise or disapproval, but just on acknowledging that they're deeply engaged. And we call that collecting. And if one does that, a little bit of relationship and a little eyes and smile and nod, a little bit of relationship before bringing them into whatever the next activity is going to be. We have some tools in this, which is that and we'll talk about this in a minute, which is that, remember, they are in the present because of their brain development stage too. So when we're moving them from one thing to another, once we've got them, then they're engaged with us, and their engagement with their other activity is left behind more easily, right? So that's collect before you direct, so that you're building a bridge between what they're doing and where you want them to be. And I have found that one of the best bridges is a song. And I'm going to sing this little song to you. It's one I used. It comes from a master teacher, Nancy Foster. And it was so ubiquitous in my classroom that I remember a little 1-year-old saying to me, when he was hungry, he would just say, "Welcome to our table." So it goes like this. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our table. Welcome, welcome. We all join hands together. And during COVID, we changed that to, let's have some lunch together, because we weren't joining hands. And this song preceded every time we sat together at the snack table, at the lunch table, whenever. Yeah.
So children knew what was coming next, and you very gently just kind of entered into their world, right? It just kind of comes through their ears, and then all of a sudden they look, where's that song coming from?
Right. And they can accept it. It comes in much more gently through the limbic system. Song, it affects a different part of the brain. And so we've moved them from what they're engaged in to something else in this gentle way. And I have songs for every transition of the day. And not that my songs should be your songs, just opening up the possibility that this is one way to produce a harmonious transition from one activity to another.
Yeah, because we do see lots of challenging emotions, and we know that, the hitting, the pushing, the biting, the hiding, the refusing to follow directions. For some children, just collapsing. I know people have said to me, they just kind of let themselves go, or shut down, grabbing, crying, all of these things. All of these things are just ways in which the little one tells us there's something going on inside of me. There's something big happening. I'm something, and especially it is around. I think we really put our finger on it, and you're the one that brought my attention to this, about not only about separations from adults, but separations from what they're focused in on.
Right. And this sentence that appears at the bottom of the slide, you're going to see it many times during the rest of the presentation. All that we see has a reason for being there. So now we're looking below the surface of the water in that iceberg. We're starting to think about what could be behind and what's its reason, because we know from our earlier slides on emotions that something has been triggered. Something needs to move, and this is the only mechanism that child has for moving it. It might be hitting, biting, but somehow it has a reason for being there.
Yeah.
that we're looking below that water line.
Yeah. So really, again, we're coming back to, well, why do these things happen, especially the eruptions? And eruptions are just, for me, when I think about it, oh my goodness, there's so much, this adrenaline, this cortisol, just kind of like overwhelming, and it has to come out. And sometimes it comes out in a very, very messy form. And we look at it and we say, why is it so messy when they're so little? Well, it's messy for very good reasons. First of all, they have big emotions, and actually they need to feel these big emotions because it is preparation for another stage, which is going to come a little bit later on, when they have to actually blend the emotions together to become a little bit more what we would consider reasonable or stable or regulated. But really interestingly is that they need to actually know what this emotion feels like in many, many times before they can move forward. And then the other kind of issue that they have, or the other factor that's playing in this, is what we call this immaturity. So the lack of, they don't have impulse control yet. We're going to look in a moment at the brain. They do, as a result, have this inconsiderate behaving. And they, of course, underneath all of that, it is huge separation alarm that's wired into them very, very strongly. So this is kind of like a combination for difficulties. The only good thing is, for the most part, they're little. And so for the most part, we can kind of manage it. But I know the biggest fear that people often have is like, well, if we let it all out when they're little, what are they going to do when they're big? But actually, it's the opposite. If we do let them let it out when they're little, then bit by bit, it's going to come into some kind of a nice developmental resolution. But if we don't let it move and it gets stuck, that's when we see the problems later on.
Yes, indeed. And now we're going to Eva is going to take us through the root of what.
Yeah. So we go right back again into the brain, the frontal lobes that are part of what we call the prefrontal cortex, which is really the most mature part of our brain. It basically, it's not yet connected. It's there. I don't want anyone to think that there's kind of a hole inside of the head. No, that part of the brain is actually there, but it takes until about 5 to 7 years and it doesn't actually get connected. And if any of you have taught, or I know that sometimes in your daycares, you have slightly older children, and you start to see a shift around 5 years old, 4 to 5 years old, all of a sudden they become, a little bit more capable of sharing and thinking of other people. And that's not just because of the wonderful work that you've done with them, and obviously your relationship with them does make a difference, but it's also now their brain is ready to move forward. So as a result of that, they really only have one emotion or one thought at a time. And again, part of that, which can lead to inconsiderate behavior because they're not thinking of anybody else, well, that's because they've got to first figure out who they are. They've got to first know what their emotions are. They've got to develop a little this tender new self that they are. It's kind of like the brain, and this is so interesting because I remember again when Dr. Neufeld described this, he said nature has its reason. So it seems like kind of unreasonable, but he said until we're given the space and the time to figure out who we are, we can't have other people complicating our lives. We have to focus on it. And so it's really important. And it is tied into the brain development. I mean, for me, once I learned the neuroscience, I went, well, you know what? There is a reason for that, and we can't rush it any more than we can pull a plant. But there's a bigger reason for it. The reason is they need to experience who they are. And of course, because they don't have yet deep attachments, they do become destabilized or upset by separations. And so again, it's kind of a whole package deal that we have with these little ones that can be distressing unless we understand the reasons that they are there. And again, in some of our earlier sessions, we've talked a little bit more about how these three pieces are. But this is what's underneath. It's a brain that is developing in a way that allows the child to develop to its optimum.
Yes, and that few attachment roots piece is huge, because as we get older and mature, and even within those first 6 or 7 years, Eva, we're putting down these roots that we talk about in an earlier session that allow us, because we have context and experience and brain development, allow us to have other ways of reacting when we're facing separation.
Yeah.
So we're less easily alarmed by it.
Yeah.
This is actually one of the most important things that Eva and I have been working on together, and uncovering this, which was new to me, a way of thinking about what are we seeing, and when do we know that a child is being feeling unsafe and alarmed and facing separation through some behaviors that we normally wouldn't put into the same category as the alarm emotions the alarm reactions that we discussed earlier. And
yeah. So again, humans are complex. It's so hard to make a statement that's definitive, but there are some general things that we know. And so when a child has this primal alarm, so this huge fear about, what's going on in their life, who actually is taking care of them, and for some of the children in your care, that that's not coming from them being put into your childcare center. Some of them, sadly, there are circumstances in their lives where the people that are meant to take care of them just don't have the resources. They have the heart and the love. I'm absolutely convinced of that. I have met many, many, many families in my long career as a child psychologist, and I have yet to meet anyone that doesn't want the best for their child. But sometimes they just don't have the resources. And so some of the children are filled constantly with this adrenaline and cortisol and just this sense of unease. And so what we see, and some of you will notice this, you'll see a child who just never seems to settle. They're restless. Some of them, and I've had people say this to me, they say, "Oh, well, this child doesn't know how to play." Well, playing is actually wired into our brain. They are now studying the neuroscience of play, and it is right next to attachment. So once your attachment needs are met, you spontaneously fall into play. When we see a child who can't seem to settle into play, then what we need to say to ourselves is, oh my goodness, this child's, their world is just too much for them. And so they can't settle in because they're constantly worried about what's going to happen. Some of them can be very anxious. They're the little worry warts that are beside you and is this okay? Are you okay? And they're always asking you and they're always wondering, and they're right beside you there. Some of them will just sit very quietly. And again, I worry so much for these little children who just don't seem to react to their world. We worry sometimes, are they healthy? Are they intellectually developing well? But for some of them, it's just too much is going on and their brain just kind of shuts it down. Some of them are hypervigilant, and we often call that they have attention problems. Of course, in the early years, we don't call that, but some of them are constantly looking around, what's going on. They notice the least little thing. They're always into somebody else's business. Some of them want to even control the world, boss other kids around, always be the one in charge. And again, it's not, it's part of being a preschooler is to want to tell other people what to do, but that I'm talking about the children for whom this is well beyond, and the desire to control and tell the adults what to do. All of these are signs that this child is living in a world of unsafety, that they can't relax yet in the care of the people that are supposed to take care of them. And I know that many of you, these are the children that break your hearts, because you know that sometimes it's really hard. But again, when we see these, we have to then just say to ourselves, well, I have to do even more.
Yes, and they are easy to recognize. I think we've all known children who fall into some of those categories. I remember a little girl, when getting dropped off at childcare, would ask her mother for 27 kisses, and the mother did that, and then she wanted just two more, and there was this bossy and controlling aspect to her, as well as being hyper vigilant. All three were there. She wanted to know anytime one of the adults left a room, where they were going, and so on. So maybe you've encountered some of those characteristics in your children as well. So this is called rest is what is missing. So when all is going well, what do we see? So here we've made an attempt to define what a child at rest is. We've talked about rest before, and we're broadly defining that as rest from the question of who is taking care of me. So they're peaceful and feels at home and able to play, able to feel sadness and disappointment, and able to cry. And we will talk more about the relationship between being at rest and feeling safe and in attachment and the ability to cry. An engaged child who's also able to play, explore, create, imitate, and be in the moment.
Yeah. And all of these things, especially in the very, very early years, but even well close to 4 years old, these things can only happen for a small period of time for a child, because their need for attachment is great. And so again, they'll when their attachment needs are filled, this is what you're going to see. But the trouble is, just like with hunger, and I think that for me is one of the easiest way to truly understand sort of what attachment is all about, because it doesn't matter. You've just you've had your breakfast. Even as an adult, you have your breakfast, and by lunchtime you are hungry again. Now for adults, that's 3 hours that we can handle, and as you know, with the little ones, that hunger needs to be replenished, right, quite regularly, because their bodies can't handle it. It's the same with attachment, and so when we have moments like this, when children have moments like this, and it can be, I don't know, Lena, you probably have a better idea sort of at the different ages about how long that is, but so whatever it is, if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and we see that, then we rejoice. Because that is a special bubble of time that they have, right, in which the beautiful growth and development can happen. But we have to also be realistic that it won't last for an hour at a time. I think you probably.
No, seldom. Sometimes by the time a child is 4 and 5 years old, yes, they can play that long.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, you're lucky with an infant to have 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think, again, we often talk about ebb and flow, things moving along. I think that these are kind of the things that we're hoping, and part of the purpose of our sessions here really is as much to help you to see what is a good sign. I had a young child who had a particularly distressing home life. And in the early days, he only ever wanted to play with other children, and which is fine. I mean, children, he was a little bit older, but he only ever wanted to play with other children. And everybody thought that was a wonderful sign that he wanted to be sociable. But actually, I knew that was a sign of his restlessness. He couldn't kind of handle being by himself. Like he needed somebody else to kind of fill his little void. And we worked with him very, very much in a nurturing, caring way. And a few months later, I came into class, and the teacher said to me, "We're just about to have, we're playtime." And she said, I think that Jamie is going to be a little bit upset today because his friend isn't here, and so he doesn't have a partner to play with." And so that was fine. It was nice. I was there observing, and so I just watched. And Jamie went off and founded a little farm, and he started to play with the little farm animals all by himself. At the end of class, I went to the teacher and I said, "Congratulations for what you have done," because he now feels safe enough to play by himself. And this wasn't something that she thought was a victory, but I knew it was a victory because he was at rest. He wasn't seeking for somebody else to fill his ideas. He was able to fill it himself. Such a small little thing. I'll tell you, I just sang the rest of the day, because as a psychologist, you're always being referred children who have problems. But I thought, my goodness, we have worked so hard, and now we see the results. So I'm hoping that some of you, as you get to that relationship with those children, that you start to notice that, oh, they're playing by themselves a little longer, staying comfortable a little bit longer. Yes, when the transition comes, they're still having a big reaction, but prior to the transition, there was engagement, focus, rest. And so
it's beautiful, Eva. Yes. And as adults who work with children and as parents who have children, how much we love it when we see that engagement. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with a child playing by themselves. In fact, as Eva's story points out, sometimes that is actually the fruit that we're looking for, that engaged play. Yeah. And I know we've all inwardly rejoiced at seeing moments like that for a child.
Yeah. So our point here is that emotions are part of leading to rest. And when emotional needs are met, then the rest can happen. The child can feel safe because all of them has been, and we'll talk more about that in the second half.
Yes, and I'm sharing this little poem to talk about what don't we see. So we recall our iceberg again. What's under the surface? Rumi is an ancient poet, Persian, who's been translated widely. Perhaps some of you are familiar with his poetry, but this one struck me as relevant. Reach your long hand out to another door, beyond where you go on the street where everyone says, "How are you?" And no one says, "How aren't you?" No one says, "How aren't you?" We're starting to look at children and be the one who asks, "How aren't you?" What is missing in this child? Is it rest? What are we seeing? What are we noticing? And what could be behind it? And if rest is what we want to see, what's not there? This is all about noticing. What are we seeing? And asking ourselves, what's not there? What is missing for this child?
So this, I think, summarizes this first part, which is respond to their fear of separation, meet their attachment needs, even when they're showing messy emotions. And we'll talk about that in the second half of how we can welcome those emotions. Because when we can prevent that separation alarm, it leads to this venturing forth in play, just moving forward. And again, here's this little guy. He's not going to go very far. And some of them do, they like to, but this is what creates the conditions. And so we're going to talk again in the second half about how we can welcome those emotions, work with those emotions, give space for those emotions, so that the true goal of what we want here is to create this rest so children can play.
Right. Yes. So our first response when we're seeing those messy emotions is attachment.
Yeah. Yeah. Not easy to do. But
Not
my goodness, I know for myself, and this, we're talking about little children, but this also works with adults. It works with adults. It works with the people that we love. When we start, my sister and I sometimes have a bit of a rocky relationship, and this can happen in families. And when I finally understood this, there were times when she would say things that would really bother me. And I learned over time, my sister has this very interesting life, and somehow things happen to her that don't happen to other people. My heart just goes out to her because she tries so hard to not let us know when things are difficult for her, but it comes out. And so I learned finally to become that interpreter with my sister. The more she said things that were driving me crazy, the more I said to myself, oh, I wonder what's going on in her life. And I wasn't always mature about it, but usually it was over the phone. So I had a chance to take a few breaths. And then I would, when she finally kind of calmed down a little bit, I would say, what's going on? Oh, and then she would tell me a story that broke my heart about somebody who had for months and months had been bullying her. I thought, oh my goodness, but I had to read that behavior to come alongside her. And boy, our relationship changed so much when I started to become the interpreter and came alongside and with a person that I loved dearly. That made it hard for me to love her when her behavior was like that. But oh my goodness, it just made such a difference. So this is really what we're aiming for here in the lives of the little ones, but also in other lives of other people in
so true.
Relationships. Yeah.
You be the asker, how aren't you? I mean, be the thinker of it. In a way, you would ask that, but you'd think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to pause here for a moment and ask Cheryl I'm going to stop sharing. Is that right, Eva? Is that what I do?
Yep, that's what you do.
Cheryl to come up.
Yeah.
And link for us.
Hi.
Something from indigenous wisdom to what we're talking about.
Well, you made me think of so many things, but I guess I got to start off with the medicine wheel. And that's why I put my camera on. But if you see this medicine wheel, it's from Key First Nations in Saskatchewan.
Ah, yes.
So when you think about, infancy, this is where it is. What is it, infancy? Infancy is in the east.
East Spring. Of course.
Oh.
Lovely.
See, love and control, because we have to control those things that they cannot. And when you look where childhood is just it's in the emotional in the south.
Good. Oh, that's so allowing lots of space for those emotions. Wonderful. Oh my goodness. I haven't seen this one, Cheryl. This is beautiful. Yeah. I'm hoping that you could share this with us. It will help. Yeah.
When I look at that, it's like it says pretty much, a baby needs love. You need to get that bonding and attachment in, and it has to remain. It's got to stay. This is something attachment will work at.
Yeah.
For long periods of time, until they feel strong enough. And when we talk about the circle of security, a child will run back to their mom or dad until they feel secure. They'll venture out a little bit more and come back again, and then a little bit more next time.
Yeah.
So I think that, we see this, we go to powwows and, your children will go only so far if they're not secure. And they'll always come back, when they're feeling insecure.
Yeah.
And something, like I wanted to mention what you had said before, previous to this this workshop, but you'd mentioned, Eva, we have a lot of emotions and we need to treat them, with joy. And I get that word again, hospitable. Hey, I did it. Took me a few practices, but I did it. But I like that saying because like we need to treat them like they're guests. They're not here for a long time. Like, I'm not going to stay angry forever. And I'm not going to be frustrated forever. So these emotions are gifts that we should be allowed to feel.
Yeah.
And we need to be taught how to control them. And we need to be taught self-regulation. And now, like this helps our brain to grow.
Yeah.
So that really hit home for me. And when you said, emotions are messy, and I think about, you said that, they could be discounted. And how many times in your lifetime somebody told you, don't cry? Like why, this is something that a child should be allowed to cry, but is it the person that doesn't want them to cry?
Mm.
So, like you have to take, it's like you need to take an inventory of yourself and how you're feeling when you're working with others, especially in the early childhood.
Yeah.
Children will cry. This is the thing that they do. And it's to, to find out why, like, what are the triggers? And we talked about, you talked about the iceberg, there's a great big iceberg there, but underneath the iceberg, you don't know what's going on. This is the iceberg, but this is underneath, and you can't see down here what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So this is some, things that we kind of have to really observe what's going on with the child, observe what's going on with the parent or with the grandparent, or if they're vocal, to ask them what's going on at home.
Yeah.
And, like the aggression is rooted from frustration. So this is, when a child gets aggressive, it's rooted from their frustration. So this is where the attack may happen. I might scratch somebody. And, like this is not, and you also made me think about, like the power and how it's related to, emotional regulation, giving a child too much power or too little power, or maybe it's chaotic. And if you give a child too much power, then they'll do whatever they want. But if you give them too little power, where you're always doing things for them, then there's a frustration that, grows because they want to do things on their own.
Yeah.
So, like I think we need to watch as early childhood people or, teachers to see, where's that balance?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that I read about play, and being play increases the repertoire of emotional regulation strategies.
Mm-hmm.
So play is needed to really battle the anger and those feelings of frustration, humiliation, and I think that we need to really allow children to experience that. And I think that being outdoors, like I had some people from France actually visiting me last year. And they had there was this man, he called himself the Nonos. And he says, I'm the caregiver, the primary caregiver of my baby while my wife works. That's my job. And oh my, never heard that baby cry. Like Eve was on it. She was only 4 months old, and he would put her down, and the minute that she started crying, like a whimpering, it was like, okay, I gotta check the diaper, I have to see if she's hungry, I have to like see if there's anything that's maybe she's hot or something like this. And she kept crying, so he was like, okay, it's time to go outside. So he wrapped her up in a little pouch on his chest, and he went outside and she fell asleep.
Nature is so healing, isn't it? It's just so lovely, soothing.
So I found that so, like we were talking about, how parenting techniques from France to here, or the First Nations, And one thing we did have in common is like when we sleep with our babies. You know, the baby was sleeping with the parents, and you know, like there was no way they were putting that baby in a crib. But I slept with my babies, you know.
Yeah.
But there's that where attachment and bonding happens, and they feel secure there, and you know,
Yeah.
that's the way people do it.
We've lost some of that really early wisdom along the way, haven't we?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, Cheryl, I don't know if people have some questions, do you think, or
Sure, I'd welcome any questions.
comments, thoughts?
I have to read this one thing to you, though.
Oh, yes, of course.
It's okay to be grumpy sometimes, to have bad days, to struggle, to make mistakes, to say the wrong thing, to feel overwhelmed and underappreciated, to be out of sorts and sort of all over. It's okay for us being humans, and it's okay for our little humans too. After all, we're all humans, right? How else will our little humans learn that it's okay to be human? Remember, we're imperfect humans growing imperfect humans.
That's lovely.
So yeah. I thought I'd leave everybody with this.
It's a beautiful thought, Cheryl. Yeah.
If anybody has asked questions, feel free to ask them, or can we take a little break some?
Yeah, just if there aren't any questions, but we might just give people a moment and then we can.
Okay.
Anybody not seeing anything in the chat?
Write things in the chat if you prefer.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not seeing anything.
Well, then let's take our 15 minutes, and that will be then 15 minutes from now, whatever time zone you're in.
It will be 2:35 in Eastern time. I think it's yes. So in 15 minutes we'll come back. And if over the break you've thought of something or you want to share something, please just put a note into the chat. We've got plenty of time. We'd be happy to hear your thoughts, your reflections, and then we'll have time at the end as well before 4:00 to have more thoughts and sharing.
And thank you, Cheryl, as always. For
no problem. I learned
closing the loop for us. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. See you in 15 minutes. You could.
All right. I'll start screen sharing if you're ready, Eva.
Yes, I don't see any questions or comments in the chat. So yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. Here we are on the second part of session 5.
Yeah.
So I welcome Cheryl's remarks about hospitality to emotions with this poem, again by the poet Rumi. I'm just going to read it. The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So I love this poem. I think it captures what Cheryl was saying about treating emotions hospitably, and also the two-way street of the nature of this work. We're greeting not only the emotions in the children who are in our care, but this is a call to ourselves as well. Each guest has been sent as a guide from beyond. Invite them in. So this is not easy work to do. This can be incredibly difficult, both as an interior exercise with oneself in treating oneself and one's emotions hospitably, and with encountering the difficult behavior that we spoke of earlier, and how to manage this and how to find balance in this work. At its root, we're talking about having permission to exist. Eva, do you have some thoughts about this?
No, I think this is it really, as you say, requires us to reflect on ourselves and to be gentle with ourselves and gracious with ourselves, and also to give room. It's not easy, but when you do give it, it reaps a lot of benefits. It really does help, and we'll get to that a bit more as we go along. But I know when I first read this poem, just the greeting and welcoming, even though it's hard. Yeah.
Even though it's hard, and it is hard, we will not cross over that point. So we thought that maybe we would leave you with a way to reflect on that idea of greeting things hospitably by asking a couple of questions. The first being, do you remember when someone tried to change how you were feeling? In other words, there wasn't hospitality to your emotional expression, or said to stop feeling that way. This is not a moment for us to share this with anyone. This is a moment for you to take, we'll give it a minute, and try to recall a time when you were in the presence of someone who was trying to change how you were feeling, not treating it hospitably. And as you're reflecting on that, and you reflect how that made you feel or what that made you want to do, what the result was for you emotionally of not feeling hospitably treated. Did you go underground? Did you yell? Did you agree with them and pursue the relationship as being more important than yourself, and how you were feeling? And this just is meant to be a momentary recollection. The next one, the second one being, do you remember the opposite? Do you remember when someone accepted your feelings, when they were treated hospitably, including perhaps yourself? A time when you accepted yourself, and how you were feeling with hospitality, even if it was one of those difficult emotions, but particularly how it felt to be in the presence of someone who got you, who accepted how you were feeling and didn't try to tell you to cut it out or feel differently or that you were wrong. I remember a story that Parker Palmer, who I've referenced earlier in the Spring Muck poem, talked about. He suffered from depression, and he said that the only thing that helped him was when someone And he had a friend who came with him, didn't advise him, didn't try to fix him, accepted him, and rubbed his feet.
Mm.
That was the only thing that helped him.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Eva, do you have
Well, the only thought that keeps coming to my mind is that when someone tells us to stop feeling the way that we're feeling, one response to that is feeling shame. There's something wrong with me, when actually there isn't, And then when someone comes alongside and accepts our feelings, how that just kind of can warm. And I know for myself, when that happens, I kind of feel like my heart is melting in a way. I just feel this warmth and softness. And interestingly, when our heart starts to melt, then it's kind of easier for us to move into another emotion. And, we talk about regulating emotions, but really it's about giving emotions their space and finding a way to kind of guide them to where they need to come out in the right place. But hopefully when you share a deep emotion, it'll be with someone who loves you enough to accept all of you.
That's so beautiful, Eva. And as you were speaking, I thought of myself in that context, because actually I was in relationship to you when you were speaking. I was listening to what you were saying, but it brought me to a feeling inwardly of tears. Just to be, when those moments when someone accepts my feelings, and even if it's myself accepting my feelings, how I'm feeling, how that brings me sometimes closer to tears, that warm acceptance.
Yeah. And that's what moves us forward, is when we can feel that sadness, and we'll talk about that shortly as well.
Right. But the equivalent experience of feeling shame about how I'm feeling is present for me as well. Yeah, thank you very much. So this is when we're talking about welcoming the whole child or the whole person. This is exactly what we're talking about. That welcome, because now we know, as we have heard about from Eva's presentation on how the emotion works, that they are meant to come out. If they don't come out, we disconnect from them and they get dammed up and stuck and they come out some other way in physical illness and behavior that's more destructive and so on. But they are meant to come out. So that's the first lesson. And then this acceptance idea, this hospitality notion that emotions are not inappropriate or unacceptable. We may not have the right relationship to them, as Eva took us through, but when they are accepted in warmth, something starts to move and grow in their processing, in the child's inward processing of that emotion. And in my case, it was a tears reaction, but there can be many other reactions as well, not inappropriate or unacceptable, and that we're attempting to avoid disconnecting the child from their emotions. So we don't want to be that surface of the water with the iceberg. We want to take a dive into that sea and take a look at what, even if we're imagining it, we know more than we know we know.
Yeah.
And our intuitions and our hearts will tell us, give us a hint, a guide, if you will, to what is coming from that child, what might be the reason for this behavior. And even if we don't know and can't possibly know, we'll begin to know at least how to react. That we know that they're having a separation. Yeah. Something is wrong. And they're having a separation, and we are able to reassure them that we are there for them. Yeah. We spend our whole lives trying to recover. At least, I don't know. I shouldn't say the word we, but I don't feel alone in this experience of spending a great deal of my life trying to reconnect with parts of myself that were deemed inappropriate or unacceptable, right? emotions and feelings.
Yeah.
And if we can, that work is, I accept it. That this is actually the work of being a human being. But what we can do now in avoiding some of the disconnecting, when it's possible, when we're able to.
Yeah. As Cheryl said, we don't have to be perfect.
We're not
We
perfect.
we won't.
Won't be perfect.
Yeah. And if any of you are looking at Lena and myself and thinking, oh, those lovely ladies. And again, I can't speak totally for Lena, but I certainly can speak for myself. Oh, that lovely lady, weren't her children lucky that they had her? Trust me, there were many times when I could not do it. Anyway, so yes, so we're not saying perfection, but we've reached a certain age where we can at least do some reflection and help you as well to reflect on your journey. And that's the other big message as well. We are on a journey. There's a lot of paths that we go down that don't quite work right. But as long as we keep moving ahead and seeking and trying harder. Yeah.
That's right. And then we want to now talk a little bit for a while about this response. What do we do in the face of how are we hospitable to these, both inwardly and outwardly? And as Cheryl also pointed out, the work of self-examination in the face of what we're seeing on the outside is a necessary piece of this. And what does it mean to come alongside? So I'm going to turn this one over to you, Eva.
Yes. And so we're looking here, and again, this is very, it's not comprehensive, but we see a whole lot of words that are displaying so many emotional states that we can have. And we see a cookie cutter. And we all have had cookie cutters in our lives. Some of us have, been fortunate because the cookie cutter has been bigger and allowed more emotions in there. Sometimes not. I know that, I know somebody whose family, his father particularly wanted happiness. He wanted his children to be happy. So in that cookie cutter, you could only be happy. You could not be sad. And this is the cookie cutter of life. Nobody has perfect parents. None of us are perfect parents or perfect adults. But what the cookie cutter basically says is, cut it out. Cut it out. And if we feel caught in that cookie cutter, it's very hard. So the next little click there. Because we're bigger than that cookie cutter. In fact, next time we do the slide, we're going to even have a bigger person there, because as human beings, every one of those emotions should be given a place. We have to be so careful not to say this is okay and this isn't okay. The expression of it, how it is shown to somebody else, yes, we can talk about that. And how to do that. But in these very early ages with these little children, we need to be happy that they are expressing it, and then we'll work on how they express it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we need to really think, but the trouble is, one of the things that happens, and Cheryl put her finger on it as well, is that the cookie cutter we were raised with makes it hard for us to accept emotions that we weren't given permission to accept. And so very often, as she said, if I see a child crying and I get really upset, oh, maybe I need to look at myself. But again, that's the beauty. Hopefully you have at least one other person in your center who then can deal with that particular child who's having an emotion that you find difficult until you can come to terms with it. I know with my husband and myself, I don't have difficulty with my children, and even as adults, expressing their frustration quite vocally. For him and his family, there were no fights. They never fought in their family. They never raised their voices. Doesn't mean to say there weren't emotions there, but in my family, being Hungarian, there was much more stuff coming out. And so, there were many other things that he could handle that I had a harder time with, but it didn't bother me if my children yelled at me, because I knew that after the yelling, we were going to go further and get to a place. And my children don't yell at me anymore. Not very often anyway. They grew out of it. But, it's that we need to also be honest about what our cookie cutter is, and then try and give a little more space to the children that we're caring for.
Yes, yes. And there are some archetypal emotions, I think, as we touched upon with the clinging and the whining and so on, that evoke deep irritation or cut it out emotions in everybody. And yet, if we make room for those and so on, it can bring about the changes that we're looking for in the expression of emotion. I'm not saying this well, I feel.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is along the line of what you were thinking of, Lena, but they have actually studied families who, when a child, and again, I know we're talking in daycare when the parent has to leave and we have no other choice. I understand that, but they've looked at families where parents respond very quickly to a child's distress, even if it's whining, even if it's unpleasant, but respond to it and react to it, and they find that within a short amount of time, those children become less clingy. But the ones who are the parents said, "No, you have to take care of it yourself. That's inappropriate behavior," they stayed that way much, much longer. So it's kind of, again, it's that backwards thing. It's that we respect what the child is trying to tell us. If we can, we respond to it. And by responding to it, it actually dissipates. It goes away. And again, we have to go back, anyway, so many dialogues and rants that we can have here, and I don't want to get stuck on them because I know we have a few more slides to go through. But there were trends in psychology which basically said that when a child is showing a behavior, you have to not reinforce it. And they were so wrong because they didn't think about emotions. And so this is partly a little bit of what we're also trying to say to you, is that someone will say, well, if you're being kind to a whiny child, aren't you reinforcing their whining? That's not what happens. When we can respond to their emotional needs, things calm down. Things do calm down. And so it's hard because we've been trained that way. And as you say, we do have this reaction, but it's amazing how it does. If you can give it time, it will resolve over time. We have to stop trying to fix everything in the moment and say, you know what, they'll grow. And many of you do this already. You know that. Those of you that have been in centers and have been with the babies and the 2-year-olds and the 3-year-olds, and you see 2-year-old behavior and you go, oh yeah, they grow out of that by the time they're 3, or oh, they'll grow out of that by the time they're 4. And you can go with the flow, but that comes with experience and kind of a maturity and an ability. And so, we're just saying that is the way to look at it.
Right. Thank you for that, Eva. Yes, and we'll be talking more about those violent expressions that we particularly have reactions to and should next time in more detail.
Yeah.
So here is the man who was the master in the US anyway, of coming alongside and extending an invitation to exist in my presence. And Mr. Rogers was on public television for many, many years. And I've heard so many testimonials to his capacity to come alongside and extend an invitation to exist in his presence through television, which is kind of remarkable, that children would feel like he was talking directly to them and accepting them. And he would say in every single one of his episodes, "I like you just the way you are." Eva, you were going to say something. Do you want me to go back?
No. It's such a beautiful thought, and amazing that even that message, how important that message is, and how it resonated with children through the television. But I like you just the way you are. Yeah.
And so brings me to thinking of a story about the north wind and the sun. I'm going to tell the story and then we'll talk a little bit about the meaning in our work. So the north wind and the sun were having a conversation one day, and they were discussing who was the most powerful. And of course, they both thought that they were the one. The north wind was pretty sure that he was the most powerful, and the sun equally sure that he was. And they decided to have a wager. And the wager they made was to, each of them had a turn to full force appear to a traveler, a young man who was walking a long road. And first the north wind blew and blew and blew. And the bet was, who can get this young man to take his cloak off first? What happened with the north wind's harsh, cold blowing was, of course, that the traveler did not take his cloak off. So no matter how hard the north wind blew, he did not take his cloak off. The north wind finally gave way to the sun and said, it's your turn now. So the sun began to shine and warm and cast its beautiful warmth down upon the traveler until what happened? The traveler sat down, removed his cloak, wiped his forehead, and it was clear that the warmth of the sun made the sun the more powerful of the two. We're using this story as a way to illustrate the conditions for emotional safety for a child. What we heard from Mr. Rogers was a very warm response. What we've been talking about in the cookie cutter, in hospitality, hospitality implies a warmth, a greeting with openness and a warmth of heart brought to the situation that will allow the child to remove those layers of words that we've mentioned, shame or disapproval or numbing out, somehow remove those layers and venture forth, come forward in their vulnerability. And this is what we mean by coming alongside an emotional experience. We are being like the sun. We are coming close and we're saying gently and slowly, we're naming, you're sad because daddy had to leave. Or for another example, it's scary right now. And another, I'm sorry that things aren't working for you. That's embracing of frustration. Things aren't working for you. That's so frustrating. That wasn't what you had in mind. You wanted Nana to stay. That wasn't what you had in mind. You wanted Nana to stay. And then one that I've personally found very effective for normalizing the violence of this age. You have lots of hits, bites, pushes, screams in you today.
Yeah, and in our next slide, we'll look at how we can help that get out. But I wanted to come back as well to things like it's scary for you. Sometimes we're so afraid that if we talk about a child being scared, that will make them more afraid. But they're already feeling afraid. Can't make them more afraid. They're already feeling it. And what we need to say to them is, I get it. I get it. It's scary. Well, let's say there's a substitute person in the classroom, and they're looking, and they'll probably show you, can happen all non-verbally. They're going to look over at that person, and, oh, yeah, it's kind of scary. You don't know who so-and-so is. That's kind of scary. Now the child goes, okay. Oh, because that's the alarm. Yeah. Okay. It's all right to be scared. We're just giving permission for it. We're naming it. We're putting a word on it that they might not yet be ready to use, but bit by bit, they'll use it. And they're going, it's okay. And then now we can guide them to the next step. And we don't just stay there, but people are so afraid that if you name a negative emotion, go to a negative emotion, talk about that wasn't what you had in mind, that they'll get stuck there. But actually, it's like, oh, we're kind of connecting together. And now bit by bit, we can move them to the next stage. And I don't know if you want to move to the next slide here.
Yeah, because what you're saying, Eva, is so important, because what we're doing in saying these words and naming these things is we're saying them with warmth and understanding. And we could say them like the north wind. It's scary right now, or something similar. You're sad because daddy had to leave. It's our tone. And the tone comes from our hearts and our embrace of this and our understanding that provides the warmth and the gentleness and the caring. We're feeling caring about them. This is what communicates. We've named something and we're showing caring. And this begins to move the emotion to another. We've got an iceberg. In a way, we're the sun now. We're trying to melt a little bit what's happening in the child and bring it up above the surface into that bright sun. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So here we are again, we're working with warmth, and we're working with coming alongside, we're working with naming, we're working with hospitality. We also, and Cheryl mentioned this as well, we need to help them find ways that work for them to express emotion. So the little wrestling match up above. That statement, we might want to move in there and prevent hurt from happening, but still to move in with warmth and understanding as we effectively separate the children and then say that something's not working for you. Something's not working for you. We're still in a warm place. And we're saying your frustration needs to come out. Let me help you. Let me help you find a way. Here's a pillow you can hit. And we might even want to narrate a little bit more about the situation. He took something from you, and that was frustrating for you. It made you want to push him over. We may, we can narrate in a neutral tone of voice, but one that's I don't really mean neutral, warmly neutral.
Yeah.
Like if you're painting the walls of your house white, you might choose a warm white, one with a lot of yellow in it. So we're going to try to do this with warmly neutral acceptance. Your frustration needs to come out. We're sympathetic to this. We've all been in a place where we have had frustration that's needed to come out. Let me help you. Let me help you find a way.
Yeah. And again, we'll talk more in the next session of how we can do that even more practically. But again, this is, and the reason we also want to talk about it today is because these are things that often people think should be cut out. And what we're saying is, let's give them space and then work with them. But first, you have to accept them before you can guide to the next point.
And I want to come back again to this one thought at a time. They are not going to be satisfied with hitting a pillow or stomping it out. Nevertheless, that is a solution to the frustration coming out. And if they can be shifted to that, sometimes it might be throwing soft balls at a tree, whatever, but eventually they'll begin to engage with another way of expressing their frustration as they are able. But don't expect at first for it to be that satisfying for them. They need to find a way, though. They need to find a way.
Yeah.
So some of those ways, again, we talked about in session 4, come through free play, where they might work with whatever is troubling them in a quiet play. Or I had a group of children where one of the little girl's sisters was very ill and was always going to the emergency room, and she had a condition, and she would play hospital with her young friend. And they would pack their bags and get all ready, and they played it over and over again. And this was a way for her to process her emotions around this, which was alarm, of course. So we give space for free play, can come out in painting, any kind of crayoning, artwork. It can come out in dancing. The stop it out suggestion is not a bad one. Adding a little humor and let's just stomp it out, all that frustration, making it a little bit playful can also engage the child in using dancing or movement to express how they're feeling.
Yeah.
We always mention when it comes to these kinds of things that we don't comment or expect, particularly with the paintings, that they be of a certain standard,
No.
something like that.
Yeah, and two things come to my mind. One is that if a child has big emotions in them, their play will be emotional play. So they will be, whatever it is they're preoccupied with, it will happen, like playing the hospital for that little girl, until that settles in her life. That is what she's going to have to do. The pure emergent play, that play of self-discovery, usually only happens after some of the emotions have been dealt with. And when there's big emotional times, we shouldn't be upset. I mean, even like if that little boy who finally was able to play by himself, let's say he came back the next day and still able to play by himself, but something had happened at home and he had some frustration, and let's say his brother wasn't very nice to him or something. So now he's going to go and play with those little animals, but he might have the animals fighting with each other, and this one do and that one there, and then this, and so there's kind of emotion going on there. And sometimes people say, well, like, shouldn't we stop that kind of play? Well, he's not hurting anyone else. We need to let it come out, because actually play is kind of a safe bubble. He's having the little animals doing it to each other. So that's fine. And again, I dearly wish that I had a whole nother lifetime to live where I could be the fly on the wall and watch as children move from emotional play into emergent play, or the play of themselves. Because, I just would love to see how that looks, but I think all of you can see that. And, and the same with the coloring and the painting. Sarah Cleary, who often accompanies us, she's not here today, as she's an artist herself and often does art with children. And one little child who was just using black and red and just coloring the paper with black and red, and she's a lovely, intuitive person. And so she just encouraged him to do what he had to do. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't wonderful. As she said, nobody else could use the red and the black. They were gone. But that's what he needed to do. And so she just gave, and he looked at her like he was kind of scared. And she went, no, here's some more. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sure that little boy felt so much better. And I'm sure given enough time, he would have probably then created something that was more pleasing. Yes. So this is why play is so important, because it gets those emotions out in a way that all we have to do is just be there and support it and give it space. And we don't have to even work so hard.
And that is not an easy thing to do, Eva. You just summed it up, to be there and give support. That's what we're doing. We're the sun shining in on this situation, giving support, but setting boundaries. And again, we'll talk about this in great detail next time. But we are trying here to bring you back to the question which we all hold of what do I do when? And gathering in this kind of information is giving you, I hope, the foundation for finding those answers of what you do when. There are some very basic principles here that we're outlining for you to consider. So one of the things that I did, I hadn't thought of doing this. My mother was an early childhood educator who also sang all the time. And there's so much that I remember from what I learned from her. I remember from her. And that one thing just came to me, and it was this little song, which is on the next slide. So I'll go back and forth here for a minute. Jack in the box is out of sight when the cover's pushed down tight. Touch the lid and up he goes. Jack in the Box with his bright red nose. And what I started to do with the children as a way of kind of playing peekaboo at a more advanced level was I got under a great big, I think it was a yellow thin throw cover blanket kind of a thing that we had in the classroom. And they were absolutely thrilled with this. And then they got to be the ones who would touch the lid and up I would jump. And this was my playful game, right? Because these are, we're talking about in this particular slide is ways to process emotion that we as the caregivers can initiate. So this was the playful game that I initiated with them. And you can see they took it up for themselves. So here's a little boy in his box. He had an actual box and somebody ran in and touched it and he's popping up, but you can't see his face. But that worked really well. And I'm going to tell another story about Jack in the Box in a minute, but I want to finish with the idea that we can initiate some ways, particularly to process emotion in our stories, our circle times, through singing and dancing ourselves, playful games, and even making tasks playful, like getting dressed and so on. We see emotional responses to lots and lots of things in the classroom. I mean, really, actually everything has an emotional response with this age group. So you will find that there will be elements of people overcoming adversity in stories, and in our circle time, we can acknowledge emotions that might be happening, such as missing. I started singing when I noticed the children couldn't settle into a circle. One little girl commented, whatever I have, somebody else wants. Okay, this was a mood. And I took a little Raffi song, which was The More We Get Together. And I adapted it on the spur of the moment to the more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the grumpier we'll be, 'cause you want what I have and I have what I want what you have. By this time, their faces were filled with delight because I was naming what had just been going on in the play a minute ago, but I was doing it playfully, non-judgmentally. I wasn't teaching anything. I wasn't telling anybody to share. I was just acknowledging what she had said, that everybody wants what everybody else has. All right. And as for tasks, it's like when it's time to clean up the room and this and that, and you have resistance and grumpiness around doing a task, which sometimes you have. Again, making it kind of playful and having a song. I would just begin with a little song about picking up. It's an old Burl Ives song, picking up pawpaws, put them in her pocket. I just changed it to picking up pawpaws, which was what we called all the stuff in the room. Put them in a basket. And, and suddenly the task became less odious.
Yeah. And I loved you coming right alongside how not good it feels, because I want something and they always want what I have, or and that is the life of these little ones who are one thought at a time, one idea. That's how it feels to them, like nobody gets them, right? And you just came right alongside and said, yep, that's what it feels like. And it's okay, because I can even sing about it.
So adding that humor, acknowledging it, and making it kind of fun without wiping it out. And sometimes, we want to be funny. This is an art, not a science. Yeah. You just learn how to put the right touch on it, and a lot of the time you don't. So
yeah, sometimes you try something and she said she would have a horrible tantrum. I don't want you to sing about it, right? So we're also trying to tell you that you can try different things. Sometimes they will work and sometimes they won't. It's not because they're not necessarily a good idea. It's just not the right moment. or it really isn't, with this group or whatever. So you have to try different things, but there are general principles that probably make sense, and coming alongside the world that these little guys live in, and acknowledging it and letting them give permission for it just can open them up so amazingly. Yeah.
So here's my follow up with the Jack in the Box. So I was caring for a child during COVID. The parents knew me well and asked me if I would be willing to. They didn't want to send their little girl to school. Then they had that possibility, and I said, yes, I would do that for a couple mornings a week. I would come. So here she is. She's just about 3. And I thought, oh, well, Jack in the Box, this would be fun. And I had noticed that she was not a child I knew before stepping in, but I had noticed that she had a lot of anxiety and a lot of those control, hypervigilant, every sound, who's going where, who's picking up Graham today, there was a hypervigilance that should have alerted me to anxiety. However, I was and alarm. And I was doing Jack in the Box because other children had found that not the slightest bit alarming. And it was a fun game that worked to help with separation and reappearing and so on and so forth in a playful way. Well, it was not true for her. As soon as I went under that cover, she became incredibly alarmed. And I went, uh-oh, I need to find a different solution to this. I needed to back off. So I opened up the cover so she could see me, and I invited her in, and we did it together, and popped off and did it together. And we stayed like this. Well, long story short, it didn't take too many times for her to actually request the game. And then we'd take turns doing it. I would do it, she would do it, and so on and so forth. But we were gradually building up sort of a familiarity with separation and reappearance, that was so alarming to her that she didn't know what was going on, or she wasn't in control of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what's beautiful about the story, beyond the fact that you intuitively were able to go to where she was at, was you didn't need to know why she had this alarm around separation. You didn't need to know that. As a psychologist, I'm always curious about it, but you didn't need to know that. You read the signs that this, even going under a blanket, was too much separation for this little girl. And yet the other thing was that instead of just comforting her and never playing that game again, you worked, we call this calibrating the alarm system. You helped her alarm system get a little bit bigger and a little bit more, because that's also part of our job, is to help children to tolerate a certain amount, as you say, of separation, but I'm going to come back. And so you played with that sense of alarm without even knowing where it came from, but you knew what you had to do. It's just a lovely, lovely story of how playing with emotions can give them the space that they need and move a child along.
Yeah. So we're back to our principles again, that all feelings need to come out, emotions need to come out. And Eva, maybe you would like to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, the one of the emotions, and again we'll spend some more time in the next session talking about the role of tears and sadness in growth and development. But the bottom line is one of the most significant emotions, especially when the world isn't working the way we need it to work, when mommy and daddy have to go and so on, are tears and sadness. And of course our little ones cry, and we have quite a few pictures of this childcare worker. I don't know, but here she's got her arms full of 2 little ones that are crying, and just such a gentle look on her face, which basically says, I'm here, I'm holding you in your sadness. And Deborah McNamara, who is one of the faculty of the Neufeld Institute, who has really studied young children. When she first met Dr. Neufeld, she had 2 little two little tiny girls in her care. and so she really, like, her heart went out to little ones. And she makes this lovely statement: in a young child, tears are the best indicator of an emotional system that is functioning well. And, we sometimes are proud. Parents get proud. Oh, my child doesn't cry. My child doesn't cry. Oh my goodness. When I heard that in our schools, I knew this was a child we were going to really have to work with. And so we have to give that space, because it's a sign that things are moving through. Very, very important.
And we will learn with noticing how to recognize different kinds of tears. And these tears that we're seeing here are in the context of a warm relationship. So these can be really tears that are expressing that emotion of sadness, rather than frustration or anger. Or there are numerous other times. You can probably name the kinds of tears you've seen.
Yeah. I often talk about them, and it is being kind of at different levels. Like, there's the tears that just kind of come out of your eyes and just spurt out, and then there's the tears. And I actually, if you look at these two faces here, and again, the one on with the little red shirt, that sadness is starting to go really deep down inside. The little pink one is not quite there yet. That one is still a little bit kind of like, I'm not happy with this, but he's starting to feel the true sadness of whatever it is that he's having to deal with in his life that he can't fix. And I think that brings us to the next slide. And here's the paradox. Sadness is the emotion that allows us to accept a separation that we cannot fix or change. Mommy has to go to work. Daddy has to go. That has to happen. And so you have to feel your sadness about, and when you do feel that, interestingly enough, you can actually learn to live with that. As you know, all the children in your care have learned to come to terms with that. But to feel that deep sadness so you can move into a place of acceptance and adaptation can only happen in the context of a safe and warm relationship. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with the tears. We just need to be the one who can help the child to find their sadness and to live in a world where everything won't work the way they want, but where it's a world where there will be more caring happening. I don't know if I've been very elegant about saying that, but
no, it's very elegant thought, and it's a complex thought that facing separation is best met with attachment, but it's attachment to it's a caregiver. And I know the tendency with infants in particular can be trying to distract from emotion and so on and so forth. And there's a place for that when things become stuck. But initially, allowing the child to experience sadness is really part of the cure for sadness. As long as it's in that safe, warm relationship, the one that they weren't feeling particularly connected to when they watched their parent leave, but which is there for them, and they begin to experience it. Does that?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other part, which is really hard, because those of us that are drawn to taking care of children, and again, I want to say it over and over again, if you haven't heard it enough from both Lena and myself, and from everyone involved with this project, you were drawn to take care of these very little children who have a lot of needs. You are very, very special people. You have particular characteristics that draw you to that. But one of the things, because you are drawn to care for, your heart gets broken when the tears start to flow, because you just want to fix it. And this is one of the times when the fixing comes with the accepting. And that it's so hard, because you want to, come on, honey, don't cry, you want to say. And actually, we want you to change that and say, come here. let me take care of you. This works both with the little ones. This also works in our lives. I know, again, I want to take care of people. I want to help people. And when my daughter had a horrible, horrible breakup, she luckily came home and she was able to be with me. And for hours on end, I had to sit with her in her sadness. It broke my heart. It broke my heart, but I knew that's what she needed. And, and so that heartbreaking feeling, which is a hard one to tolerate, is kind of what you have to live with. Because when I was able to accept her tears, and again, we'll go through this in the next session, how she went through it, then she could bounce back and find a way through. But boy, it's tough because we don't want to see them sad. But it's okay.
What you're saying reminds me of something. Of the difference between a heart breaking open and a heart shattering. And what you're describing with your daughter was your heart breaking open in acceptance. Open, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, not shattering.
Yeah. Yeah. It could feel the same, but I knew what the difference was. Yeah.
And so we call this caring, right? We are caregivers. Our children are coming to childcare or daycare. Care is central to our work. And our message to you today is that if we, the adults, hold caring so that the child has the experience of their wholeness, that we are doing the most important work that can be done for these children. We are serving them. Emotions are meant to come out. All that we see has a reason for being there. And we are the carers, the holders of this work and this journey. We are human. We are not perfect. We will make mistakes. We'll run into situations that we cannot possibly solve, no matter how big our hearts are. But this is at the core of central to the message of this work, this professional work.
Yeah. And just by coming back every day and letting the children know I'm back again. That's all children want to know. When they see you the next morning after both of you have had a difficult day together, and they see you the next morning, the only thing they want to know is, are you willing to take care of me today? And all we can say with our hearts is, I'm going to try my best. And we just keep doing it until we sort of figure a way out, and then we can do that. So
you can tell Steve and I both have a passion for this, and a lifetime devoted to it.
Yeah.
So grateful for you to be here with us. I'm going to move on to the key concepts and phrases from session 5 that we pulled out. There's a picture of Dr. Neufeld, who is the founder of the Neufeld Institute and our mentor and teacher. Emotions need to be expressed. Meeting attachment needs prevents separation alarm. A child experiences separation when interrupted from whatever they happen to be engaged with. Sadness is felt in the context of safe and warm relationship. How true that is. 3 emotions meant to avoid or fix separation: pursuit, alarm, and frustration. Respect emotions and make space for their processing. All that we see has a reason for being there. And now, Eva, do we open up for?
Yeah, if it would be lovely for those of you that are so moved, if you want to just maybe just share with us in the chat just one thing that stood out for you in this presentation. And for others of you, if you have a question or comment, please feel free once we stop sharing the screen here to engage your cameras and your microphones. And well, actually, we'll let Cheryl have a moment. Yes, we'll have let Cheryl have a moment to just respond to what we've presented so far. But then after that, we would ask you to do a little bit of sharing and communicating with us about what stood out for you in this session.
I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yep.
Okay, here we are. There you are, Cheryl.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what, Lena, I really love your voice. The songs that you sing and the way you sing them is just phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
Like, we need to get a recording done, of children's songs and get some of those tunes in the daycares and in the early childhood programs.
I would love that.
Yeah. So, some things that struck me today is, as a First Nations person, like we talked in the beginning a bit about, like a residential school and the damage that happened there to our parents, to our grandparents. And, like there was no invitation to exist. And this strikes me as something, you know what I mean? That it's hard to put into words, but for me, it quieted the language. My grandparents were, people who constantly spoke in Anishinaabe, but as as people suffered from what happened in schools, it kind of made them more quiet.
Yeah.
So, just having said that, the way that you speak to children and the way the language was and the change that happened, like when I see a child, I could tell a child, no matter been. That means sit down. But if I spoke to him, in your soft voice, Lena, when you're really relaxed, then I would say, come over here and sit down. And this is the thing that kind of was taken away from the people, because they weren't, our Anishinaabe people were not allowed to speak the language. And that I often think, I think about the sensitization that has to be done there, the importance of us to realize how we were parented and raised by grandparents and everything, and to recognize that and to do what we should be doing with children, because like you said before, it's theirs. It was there all this time. It's innate. And, there's words like, when I look at, you said our journey in Algonquin, we would say, Pamadizi, or, Pabamadzi. It means, our path, we're walking to a good way, that this is our journey. And I think about how people, like communicate, on when we go to the reserve, and somebody will say, well, where's my shoe? It's over there. You're pointing with your lips, like a what's but it's a kind way of saying, okay, I see it. It's just right there. And when I think about, you talked about moving gently into, helping children, co-regulating with them. Mm-hmm. And, like you said, we have to be with the child. We need to get down to their level, and we need to use that quiet voice. And this is one of the things we are good at right now, is using that quiet voice. and to make eye contact. But that depends on, the severity of what's happened and how you were raised, and touch. But, if you trust your gut in terms of touch, then you'll realize what the proximity should be like. So having said that, it's hard to talk about that, because you have to realize, like, if I go back into the past, like, I have a friend whose parent was she was in like a day school, and she was abused there. And her parenting skills were not the greatest, and she didn't show emotion to her children. So when you don't show emotion to your children, and you don't react in those ways that you're talking about, I hear you, you're feeling down right now, you're really, really sad, and that was not, okay. Well, this never happened for that parent. So how did she raise her children?
Mm-hmm.
And I find that, like, putting them through, art, take them outside, let them play in water, mud. These are just the reasons why play and being with them, taking that time to focus and listen with your heart.
Yeah.
That would, definitely help.
Yeah.
And I want to show you my last example here, because I'm into art too.
Well, good.
But I'm just making these earrings.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. So
yeah, beautiful.
My art, it makes me calm, because you have to go through every needle, and it's the red dress with the MMIGW.
Oh, yes, that's beautiful. Yes, the red dress. Yeah, remembering the women who went missing. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Oh, Cheryl, beautiful.
Wow.
So these are things that keep me calm.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think of that mother, and her cookie cutter was when she was minuscule, right? There was no place for emotion. So she probably tried the best she could, but and that's why, again, we need, that's why we talk about intergenerational trauma, because you can only give what you were given. And if that was the one thing. And then the other beauty of it is that through play, we don't have to be so perfect, because play does the job. Play is a helper to us. So and that's why I always, one of the schools that I worked in, this was for older children. It was a school for children with severe behavior problems. And when they finally got it, they had 2 afternoons of playtime for those children. 2 afternoons. They were grade 1 to grade 6. But 2 afternoons of playtime, because they knew those children had to get those emotions out, and play was the most natural way of doing it. And after about 6 months, people were coming to the school and saying, well, these children aren't so bad. No, because, 2 things. And I'll save my story about coming alongside and frustration for the next session. But the staff changed the way in which they looked at the children. They just changed, and the children changed, because the staff said, oh, go ahead and play. Oh, it's a little bit of rough play. That's okay. We're here to keep you safe. Go ahead, get some of it out. And the children started to change. And that's why it's with some of the families, we have to provide that place for playing. But no child gets hurt by playing. This is the other thing. All the research says if you let children play until they're 7, they become really good learners. So let's not take away the most healthy thing that children can do. Let's let them play.
That's right. Well, anyways, thank you for allowing me to share that with you and sharing all your wonderful information.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. The healing comes from the culture, Cheryl. And thank you so much for participating with us in this.
Yeah. Thanks, Dominique.
See something from.
Yes, she's more comfortable writing in French. She says, she says, thank you, Miigwech, and thank you for the presentation. I have to leave. I wish you all the best in the future. Thank you.
And we should put a reminder for the Q&A, Eva, the 19th.
Yes. In fact, let me go and I'll go and even try and get the link for where it is.
We're loving these Q&As too, because they are a chance to have an intimate conversation about things that are of particular salience for you. So please feel free to join us.
You get a chance to think about what it is that we've said and rethink about it, and then come and ask us whatever questions you want. So let me just find the link. There it is, Q&A. So the next one is, and I will type it in a moment, April the 19th. And I'm going to give the link. Unfortunately, for those who are listening to this on a recording, you can write Valérie Fortin, or if you know Cheryl, you can write to Cheryl as well, and get that link. But let me just come back. Oops, where are we here? Sorry, I'm getting lost. So this is the link, and the date is April
19th at
19, from 6:30 to 7:30 Eastern.
Yep.
Just typing that in as well. Feel free to join us. So April the 19th, and as I say, write to Valerie or to Cheryl. You probably know their email addresses, and you can get the link there. And sometimes it appears also on the FNEC Facebook page. Val will send that out as well as a notice. So hopefully people can find the Q&A. We don't record those ones because we want people to feel very free with bringing whatever concerns they have. We do usually have Patty Hunter and her group who join us for the Q&As. And so we answer whatever questions we can about any of the topics that we've brought up to date.
Or things we haven't thought of.
That's true too. And it helps us also to prepare for what people might want to know more about as well. So it's very helpful to us to get the feedback, to get the questions, to get the, So.
Well, thank you, everyone.
I guess if there aren't any questions or comments, we will let people enjoy the rest of their afternoon.
Yes, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, ladies, and thanks for all the participants, and to Bruno.
Yes, thank you, Bruno, for doing that. You can stop the recording now, I guess.